Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to dive deep into something a little different in the world of digital assets, and we're going to look at the long-term viability of an investment, starting with 1.01 Bitcoin.
Which in 2025 equates to roughly 700 USD.
Exactly.
And we're going to analyze and see if it's possible to turn that initial 700 USD into $100,000.
Wow, yeah,
Yes.
that's a pretty significant leap. So to really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of this, we're going to be utilizing compound interest models.
A very powerful tool
Very powerful.
when you're looking at exponential growth.
Yes, and obviously we want to lay out all the different scenarios of potential growth.
Absolutely.
And, really give you guys a clear and a data-driven understanding of the potential and maybe the pitfalls of this type of investment strategy in digital assets. So let's get right to it.
So to set the stage here, just as a reminder, the price of Bitcoin today is hovering around 70,000 USD.
That's our starting point.
That is correct. So our example investment, 0.01 BTC, is currently worth 700 USD. And our goal, as mentioned, is $100,000.
Which means that Bitcoin would have to appreciate significantly.
Right. For that fraction to reach $100,000, a whole Bitcoin would need to be worth $10 million.
$10 million of Bitcoin.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, to assess the time frame for this potential growth, we are going to primarily be using the compound interest formula.
Okay.
And that formula states that future value equals present value times 1 plus the interest rate to the power of n.
Okay, so break that down for us.
Okay, so future value, that represents the target value of your investment, in this case, $100,000.
Got it.
Present value, that's the initial value of your Bitcoin, holding, in this case, 70,000 USD.
Right.
R, that represents the projected annual growth rate of Bitcoin. And then N, that's the number of years that it would hypothetically take for Bitcoin to reach that $10 million price point.
And that growth rate is key.
Yeah, it is.
Because we've put together a table
Yes, we have.
that illustrates how different rates of annual growth would directly impact the estimated time for Bitcoin to reach that target of $10 million.
Exactly.
So let's take a look at some of these scenarios.
So if we're looking at an annual growth rate of, say, 20%, our model indicates it would take approximately 29 years for Bitcoin to reach that valuation.
29 years, okay.
Okay, now, if we bump that growth rate up to 25% per year, the time frame shortens significantly to about 24 years.
So we're shaving off some years there.
We are shaving off some years with that increased growth.
Okay, cool. And what about 30%?
30% brings it down even further to about 20 years to reach our goal.
20 years.
A more optimistic scenario of a 40% annual growth rate that suggests that the target could be achieved in about 16 years.
Getting even quicker.
Yes. And finally, a very accelerated growth scenario of 50% per year. Our analysis projects that Bitcoin could reach $10 million in approximately 13 years.
So it really seems like that growth rate has an exponential effect on that investment timeline.
It really does. Even a small change in that annual percentage can mean huge differences in how long you would be holding this investment.
And so it begs the question, what would drive that growth? What are the dynamics that we're looking at here that could really either push Bitcoin in that direction or maybe hold it back?
Well, that is a very good point. And that's where I think some additional learning activities would come into play if you were wanting to dive deeper into this analysis.
Okay, like what kind of activities?
Well, you could create a personalized simulation using like spreadsheets or coding where you model these different rates and time frames.
Oh, interesting.
You can even compare it to traditional investments.
Okay, so you can get really hands-on with it.
Exactly. And, really get a better feel for how sensitive that time frame is to those growth rates.
I see.
Another key activity would be to look back historically at how Bitcoin has performed after each halving.
Right.
That programmed reduction in the rate at which new Bitcoins are issued.
Every 4 years.
Exactly. And see if there's any correlation there with macroeconomic factors or technological advances.
So past trends potentially give us some insight into what might happen in the future.
Precisely. And then finally, designing a personal accumulation strategy. Like, let's say you decide to buy 0.005 BTC every 6 months. You could then estimate the future value of your investment at different time horizons, taking into account the risks involved and, maybe exploring some alternatives.
Okay, so kind of like creating your own personalized investment plan.
Exactly. A more practical approach.
I like that.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there who want to take a deep dive, on their own, maybe do some more research, what are some of the best resources out there for them to look into?
Well, I would definitely recommend starting with the Bitcoin Standard
Yeah.
by Safety and Amos.
Yeah, that's a classic.
It is a classic. It provides a really good economic perspective on the nature of Bitcoin.
Yeah,
It's a very, very strong theoretical framework.
definitely. And what about staying up to date, on the latest news and trends in the crypto market?
Well, I would definitely recommend checking out websites and platforms like CoinDesk and Glassnode.
Yeah, those are great resources.
They offer up-to-date data expert analysis. And, you can stay informed on the latest developments in the world of crypto.
Now, for those who want to get a little bit more into the quantitative analysis,
Yeah, for the data heads out there.
historical price databases
Yes.
available on platforms like Yahoo Finance or TradingView.
Those are essential.
Those are essential.
They provide you with the tools to really study those long-term trends and patterns.
Yeah, you can really dig into the numbers.
Absolutely. And of course, you cannot forget the OG,
The original Bitcoin white paper,
the Bitcoin white paper.
written by Satoshi Nakamoto.
It provides a foundational understanding of the vision behind this whole technology.
Absolutely.
So it's a great starting point to understand how it all works.
So let's get a little bit critical here.
Okay.
When we look at Bitcoin, can we really consider it a sustainable store of value over the long term?
Yeah.
Something like gold or traditional currencies?
Well, that is a very important question. Its historical volatility raises some questions about its stability as a store of wealth.
Yeah, because gold has been around for thousands of years, and it's been pretty stable.
It has a very long track record.
Bitcoin is still relatively young.
It is relatively young and, it's entirely digital.
And what about external factors? Things that are outside of our control.
Yeah, absolutely. Regulatory, technological, macroeconomic, anything like that could have a significant impact on Bitcoin's growth trajectory.
Governments could step in. We could have some sort of disruptive technology come out of nowhere.
Exactly. Or, changes in the global economy.
Yeah, the world is a very uncertain place.
It is.
And I think it's important to address the ethical implications here because, when we're talking about an investment that could potentially, 10, 100x.
Especially among younger populations.
Exactly. It can seem very speculative. And so, what is our responsibility when we're discussing these types of scenarios?
Yeah, I think it's crucial that we promote an informed understanding. Not just the pursuit of quick profits.
Absolutely. We don't want to encourage reckless behavior.
No, we do not.
Finally, I think it's worth reflecting on what lessons we can take from, this specific analysis of Bitcoin.
Right.
And apply it to maybe other emerging assets.
Like AI.
AI, renewable energy, big data.
Absolutely.
All of these things are kind of in their infancy.
Yeah.
And so those same principles of exponential growth and considering different scenarios, I think, can be really helpful.
Very helpful in navigating that space.
So to wrap things up here, I think it's clear that Bitcoin presents a very unique case study
It does.
for understanding the power of time and finance.
The power of patience.
Yeah, and how a modest initial investment like 0.01 BTC
700 USD
could potentially grow substantially.
to 100,000.
But it is important to emphasize that in such an uncertain environment, having a well-defined investment strategy is more crucial than trying to predict the future with perfect accuracy.
Absolutely. You have to be able to adapt and manage those risks.
So this whole exercise has really highlighted the convergence of a lot of essential skills.
And in the world of modern finance.
From compound interest calculations to strategic scenario analysis to, developing that critical thinking mindset.
And the ability to combine those skills is becoming more and more crucial.
So as we close out today's deep dive,
Yes.
remember, investing in the future is about so much more than just, accumulating that initial capital.
It's about having vision.
It's about anticipating and adapting to the inevitable changes that are going to happen.
Absolutely.
Because in the end, the most valuable capital isn't necessarily the amount of resources that we have.
It's the ability to discern how to use those resources effectively.
That's right. It's about making informed decisions and being financially intelligent.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
See you next time.